Hi students, this is part 2 of the basics of data modeling for the executive MPH program, the Applied Public Health Informatics track. Today we're going to go through a review of a small data modeling exercise you saw during the opening. We'll look at Toad Data Modeler and the components of it, the main ones being the Explorer, the Toolbar, and the Modeler. We'll look at concepts of entities as they apply to Toad, associative entities, attributes, including data types, domains, and descriptions, and we'll look at subtypes and what happens when you transform to physical. Let's switch from here to look both at the small modeling exercise as well as look at Toad within the RSPH desktop. So on this side of the window you can see that I'm in the RSPH desktop, and on this side I am in the Word file, which is the small exercise on data modeling. So the small Word file on data modeling has a minimalistic view of requirements. It has just enough for you to get a sense of what is needed for this model. It's not written in real requirements language. It's just enough for you to do a mini model. It has a few tables, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, employee, department, an associative entity, employee, department, team, and then team employee, which is another associative entity. Minimalized requirements are listed here. The system must capture information that identifies an employee. Employees must be uniquely identified. They must have a first name and last name, a middle initial. Gender must be captured. The employee race must be captured. Ethnicity as well. There should be a home address for an employee, and it must capture 3 types of phone number. Employees must have a current status where the possible values are active, retired, or inactive. They also must have a date hired. Employees may have a date fired, which is populated only if the employee is fired. Employees may be assigned to one-to-many teams, and employees must have a role on each team to which they are assigned, where the possible roles are listed. So on and so forth. Employees may be internal, where they have a gross salary, travel expenses, and special payments, all indicated as dollars, but they also may be external, where they have a base salary, health insurance, and receive a bonus. These are all reflected in dollars. Departments must capture department information. A department must be uniquely identified, have a name, and a manager, where the manager may change over time. A team must have a unique name, and an employee can belong to one-to-many teams. Teams are not specific to departments. So how would we model this? Well, first we're going to get into Toad Data Modeler. So from the desktop I'll go to my informatics folder, and then I'll open Toad Data Modeler 6.0. And I'll get this, your license will expire in 30 days note. I'll say continue evaluation. If it prompts me for other things like standard installation, I'll go ahead and choose that. If it prompts me to participate in an evaluation, then I'll say yes if I'd like to do that. When I open Toad Data Modeler, I get this screen, and this screen opens with a model that is for a video. And it's interesting. It has some things you should look at. If you'd like, you can peruse it. For our model, we're not going to need it. We'll end up closing it, and we'll open a logical model. This is a physical model. I can tell because all the keys are shown. In Toad logical model, only primary keys are shown, foreign keys are not. There are a number of panels that are the same for the logical and physical. Here on the left you have an Explorer. Here you have a large area, which is your modeling area, and then up at the top you have various ribbons. Since we're not doing a physical model, let's go ahead and close this. So we'll do File, and we'll do Close, Model. Do you really want to close Model Video Rental? Yes. I'm going to close it. Now I'm going to do File, New, Model. When I do that, I get multiple tabs. This is a tab-driven app. You always have multiple tabs. The one on top is the physical data model. That's not what I want, nor do I want universal data model. I want logical. Make sure you choose that. Remember, physical is on top. You're going to go to logical. You'll click on logical model, and then you'll click OK. You'll also want to give your model a name, but you can do that when you save it. Logical modeling is far simpler than physical modeling. It doesn't have as many components. It's one of the reasons we start there. Many of the same functions that you have on the toolbars, you also have through the menus. You can scan your menus, and you can scan your toolbars. They do have tooltips or balloon help, and those tell you what each of the functions is for. Some of the main ones you'll use are right here: to create an entity, relationships that are non-identifying or identifying, a self-relationship, an inheritance, this is supertype, subtype, to put a timestamp on your model, and to create categories. You can also do things over here like auto layout. These usually mess up your model. You can try them and you can do undo, but typically they don't work as you might want them to. You also have basic zoom functions here. And here, of course, you've got your save. You have connections to databases you can create. You can do reverse engineering from a physical model that is in a database, a physical instance of a database. You can compare against two models, merge, and you can do a conversion to a physical model. And of course you can do things like print and zoom in, as I mentioned earlier. If you lose your views, look at the toolbar option that gives you your various views. Here's your Logical Model Explorer, your application view. And here you have the ability to verify your model and to generate a report. You can show captions or you can show names, and you can include attributes, unique identifiers, primary identifiers, descriptions, or just entities. You should play with those to see what you get on your model when you choose the different options. Depending on your audience, one may be good over another. So the first thing we're going to do is create our entities. We'll click on Entity and we'll bring it over to our modeling surface. We'll copy and paste that a few times just to get our other entities. Since here it's telling us which ones we need, so that should be enough. If not, we can create more. Let's start with employee and start putting in some of the information we need. When I open this, I see tabs. I go to my General tab first. There's a caption and a name. This corresponds to the caption or the name that you show here. Captions are typically what you use in a logical model, and name is what you use in a physical. If it's a simple word, it may be the same. If it's more complex, it may be slightly different. I can indicate categories and I can indicate size. Categories are what give you your different colors. And now I'll go to attributes and I'll start adding some of those. You do that by clicking add, and then you double click on the attribute itself. You get that message, changes have not been confirmed. Just ignore that. And then you can modify your attribute. So the first thing you'll do is you'll give it an ID. So here's my employee ID. And over here, it copies it and gives you the same thing. Each organization will have its own naming convention. In my organization, let's say that we abbreviate employee like this, and we use an underbar for our physical model. Now I can indicate this is integer if I want, and I can say that it's mandatory, and I can apply it. However, each of my tables is going to have an identifier that's unique. So this is an opportunity for me to create a domain and use that domain across all of them. It makes it easier for me to indicate the data type. Every attribute needs to have a data type where the data types can be integers, numbers, characters that vary in length called varchar based on how much room you need or actually use up to a max that you specify. You can have dates, date times, and all kinds of other things. So let's go into domains and create a couple of these. You do it just the same way as you do anything else. You do your add. You double click on the domain. It says changes haven't been confirmed. You say yes. And then you create your domain name. So I'm going to create one that says unique identifier. And I'm going to make it a data type of integer. And then I'm going to say OK and add, so I can add another one. And then I'm going to add one that's short characters. I'll choose varchar, and I'll make it 30 in length. And then I'll do OK, and I'll add another one. And let's make this one long characters. Again, we'll choose varchar, but this time we'll choose a longer length. So this is for things like notes. We'll make it 200. And then let's also, I think I'm going to have addresses. Usually I do. So let's create one for addresses and make that address length somewhere in the middle, like maybe 50. I may also have ones for phone number and state and other things. You can have lists associated with them. It makes them very easy because when you assign the same domain across multiple attributes across your model and then decide you've got the wrong value, your length is too short, you can change it in one place and it'll be applied across your whole model wherever you've used that domain. So now let's go back into here, and instead of specifying the data type, we'll change it to the domain, unique identifier. We'll apply that and say OK. Now we'll add another one. Let's make this the name. And remember our exercise in our Model 1, Part 1 video. And in our Part 1 video, there we go. Sometimes it takes some convincing. We learned that things like name need to be taken down to a more granular level. And we're not going to do that here. This is a quick logical model, but please do keep in mind that it should be done. Another way I can get this to open is to click Edit. There it goes. I don't know why it's not taking my clicks, but sometimes it doesn't. And here I can say first name, at least, to start getting us there. And then let's say my convention is F name. Long car and short car don't quite fit. So I'll go ahead and specify the length I want. I'll make it 60 length. And then I'll also add a last name. And again, I'll give it a length of 60. Oh, I forgot to make those others mandatory. Let's see if I can fix that. If you look at this here, you see that you've got a number of columns. Identifiers, the caption, the name. And look here, even just looking at what I've got, I can tell that I forgot to update my name to meet my convention. It shows my data type, either as the domain, which has a different associated icon, or the data type that I specified directly. Here it shows my length, whether I made it mandatory. Now let's go back into last name and let's change that last name to meet my convention. That looks more consistent. We'll say OK. And when we do that, we get this unique identifier and missing descriptions error. That's all part of our validation. So let's see why. Well, one thing I need to do is I need to tell it that the employee ID is a unique identifier for my entity. How do I do that? Well, I go to the Unique Identifier tab, and really there's two ways. And I click on Unique Identifier, and when I click on it, it opens a pop-up, and the pop-up allows me to go to Attributes. I can click on the employee ID, which is my unique identifier, and move it over. Once I click OK, then this has a unique identifier. We have to figure out why we're getting all of these other errors, and we have to resolve them. These name uniquenesses are an issue because my entities all say entity, I think. But we'll figure it out. The other place you can set an identifier is here. If I double click that, it removes it as a unique identifier. Clicking it again makes it one. Let's apply that and say OK. And let's move to my next entity, which is my department. Yes, there it is, department. General attribute, call it department. So you just trace through all of these and you add the information that you need. So here's your department ID. We'll give it the domain of unique identifier. And then we'll do OK and add, so we can go straight to attribute 2. See how much easier that is? You don't have to go through that silly naming, accepting of the pop-up that it gives you. So here's department name. Is there a domain we can use? Yeah, probably. Let's use the short. That should be mandatory. And what else did we need to track about the domain? Let's click over here. About the department. Must have a name. A department must have a manager, but the manager can change over time. So we'll figure out how to handle the manager. But for now, let's apply this and click OK and get out. Let's make the department ID a primary key and go ahead and click OK. We're still getting missing descriptions for all of these. So one of the things we have to do is to go ahead to our description field. The description field exists for the department as well as the attributes. And you need to indicate the description. This is the department entity. It is used to capture information about the departments in the small exercise company. There we go. And then for each attribute, I also need to provide that. Unique identifier of the department entity. Name of the department Okay, it's much happier now. And you have to do the same thing here. You have to go to the description and put in description for employee and do the same thing with attributes. And then, based on this, you already know that an employee can only be in one department at a time. There it is. An employee must be assigned to only one department at any given period of time. So you know that you could potentially have the department go directly to the employee. So this could be like a parent with a foreign key going to employee. But if you did that, then every time the employee's department changed, you'd have to figure out some way to audit it. That is doable, but a better option is simply, let's see what happens when I do that. Not what I want. Just trying to get rid of that. Let's go back. Here and here. Sorry about that. That was in the way. Let's make an associative entity between department and between employee. So I'm going to do that with these keys, non-identifying relationship. And I'm going to click on it and then go from my first entity to my second entity. And then click on that second entity. By default, this comes up as a one employee to zero to many of these employee departments. Let's go ahead and name that before we forget. It's the association between employee and department. There we go. Go to your attributes and do your add. Edit it. Employee department ID. Follow your convention over here to name it. I'm going to go ahead and use my unique identifier domain. Do OK and add. And remember, they can only be in one department at a time, but their departments may change. So I need something like a start date and an end date. Here, I'll just choose the data type of date. I'll do my OK and add because it's quicker. And again, I'll just choose date. And then I'll apply this and do OK. I haven't added my descriptions. It's not going to like that. I'm going to make all of these mandatory except the end date, because when I first create the record, I won't have an end date. I'll only have an end date for one department when the employee switches to another department. I'm going to get verification errors because I didn't put in my descriptions. Now let's also put in our relationship on this end. We didn't include all our department attributes, but we just got a flavor. Again, I click here, and I take it over to here, and I click again. Now, this is really important. In a logical model, although I have made these relationships, it is not showing me the foreign keys that have been contributed from this table to here or from this table to here. But they do exist. They are there. When you create your sample records for your assignment, I expect you to show them, even though you don't see them on the screen. Now, instead of you watching me one by one go through this whole model, let's go ahead and let's open up one that's already made. You can do this as well by going to the S drive, course, APHI540, opening, and opening the employee logical model. Before you do anything else with it, you want to save the model as, and you want to save it to your own drive. Don't change it. Save it to your own drive. In fact, even better is to copy it over and then open it after you've copied it. I'm going to Toad Data Modeler, Standard Installation, Models, and then I'm going to save it right here, except as you see, I've already copied it over. So I'll just use the one that I have there. Sure, overwrite it. They're the same. So now let's close or minimize our write-up and take a look at how we've expressed the requirements in this overall model. so it'll be a little bit easier for you to see. We'll make this a little smaller to bring everything onto the screen. Oh, that's too small. Now you can't see it. Notice that in this model, as I hover over my attributes, they have descriptions and I can see them. At least some of them do. Some of them are in bold. Those are mandatory. Some of them are not in bold. They're grayed out. Those are optional. And I did two different things here in this example. In one, I chose a relationship for employee department where it was this, an identifying relationship. When you choose an identifying relationship, the parent key contributes its primary identifier to the primary identifier of the associative entity. I did the same thing on this side. I did it to illustrate the difference between what happens when you choose an identifying relationship and you choose a non-identifying relationship, which is what I did here for employee team or team employee. So here's your team employee, and it has a start date and end date in a role, and the relationship is non-identifying. So I expect the key for the non-identifying relationship to contribute itself as a foreign key, not as part of the primary key. When we convert this to a physical model, we'll see the difference. Now here, we show our two subtypes for internal employee and for external employee. This is my subtype notation. So how did I get there? Well, here's APHI employee. I'm going to switch back to our logical model. And in fact, when I switch back to our logical model, I have my two little entities down here waiting to be internal employee and external employee. And let's just name them at least. Oops, got too many L's in there. Get a sip of water. And I misspelled employee. Now, how do I indicate my supertype subtype? The notation for that is right here. It's called inheritance. I click on it, move to my supertype entity, and then draw a line to my first subtype. Click on it. Then I do it again, but for my second entity, I go straight from my subtype notation to my second entity. Now notice this is a little different from the one you saw in the other model. In this model, there's no X. Why is that? Well, if you click on it, once again, it has tabs. And it says The caption is Inheritance 1. You probably want to name that. And the parent is employee. I have 3 options down here: logical, only, exclusive, and complete. Exclusive tells the system that this can either only be an internal employee or an external employee, not both. If I forget that, though, I can just go to help. The help on here is not bad. It's not great all the time. It doesn't tell you how to do things, but it does tell you the meaning of things that are in here. And while this gives you a good definition of exclusive, for exclusive inheritances, Toad Data Model generates triggers that will perform a check whether a correct record in siblings exists or not, and decide whether a record can be added to the table or not. Exclusive inheritances are displayed with a cross in the middle of the graphic. Standard inheritances don't have the cross inside the graphic. Complete are for logical information only. The information says that all records must be complete. Both your subtypes must be complete. On the Generation tab, you have additional information, but let's get to that in a minute when we look at transformation. So that's your inheritance and your exclusive or your complete. This is what turns into your team. And now, let's save this logical model, and here it is. Our little logical model for our video. And then let's move back to the employee model once again. And it just did something flaky. So let's close these out and reopen it. It is software. Sometimes these things happen. So let's just get out of all of it and reopen it. How bizarre. It just has random things everywhere. In fact, let's get out of the student desktop altogether and see if we get back in, if it'll be better. And we'll continue on. It's much better, though very bizarre. There we go. Very nice. make it a little smaller so we can see it. And then let's continue our discussion. Okay, so getting back to this, I want to look at two things. We were on supertype, subtype, and before we finish supertype, subtype, I want to open this back up and go to generation. Generation deals with what happens when you go from a logical to physical model. You always have to resolve supertype, subtypes, and as powerful as supertype, subtypes are on the logical end, the way you implement them on the physical end really depends on your application and your data and what you find when you do your attributes. If you find that most of your attributes are in the parent table, which means that they're shared across the child tables, then you may choose to implement it physically as a single table where the parent gets all the attributes of the children. Now, if some of the attributes are specific to only one child type and not the other, then you need a type attribute that's added, and you need to build in logic that tells the system when the attributes specific to one child should be updated and when they shouldn't. If you find that each of the child tables has quite a few attributes that are independent, or these really are very separate concepts that you're tracking, then you choose N to 1 tables where each child inherits the parent. The other option is to have the tables look like it does in the logical with a parent and 2 children. In that case, you choose the third option, N tables, where the physical model matches the logical. Let's also look at the relationship. The relationship is where you specify the caption of the relationship itself as well as the name. Here, we've only done it one way, but really it should be done both ways. I should have is a member of the employee department. The employee department includes or has employees. When I do that, I get the slash line, and it matches more of what we looked at in the opening session, where you could read your sentence both ways. And that's really a way that the caption should be defined. It's part of your documentation, and it's part of validating that you really know what a model is doing. Notice other things about the relationship. You have a cardinality tab. The cardinality tab shows you the left side and it shows you the right side. The left side can be mandatory or it can show a dependency, and the right side can as well. The right side, dependency and mandatory, if you change it so you have mandatory on both, then notice what happens to your model. All of a sudden, you have a bar indicating 1 and only 1 employee on the left, and you now, instead of having a 0 to many relationship on the right, you have a 1 to many relationship on the right. I can change that back by changing my dependency here. Now what happened? I changed it from being that dashed line where it's a non-identifying relationship to where it's an identifying relationship, just as we have above for employee department. To fix it, I just remove that flag. Here, I no longer have mandatory and I no longer have dependency. So I'm back to where I started. One employee can be in 0 to many team employee records. Let's look at how these keys between identifying and non-identifying get translated when we convert this model to a physical model. I took the simple route. I'm going to choose Microsoft SQL 2008, and I'll leave the model name as it is, and then I'll do a conversion. Once I'm done, I'll close it, and again I'll zoom in so I can see the whole model better. Notice now that you've got your keys. They're shown here. I may have to click on this table in order to see them, and I may need to resize this a bit. But notice that for the identifying relationship, both of the keys that have come over, the department ID and the employee ID, make up the primary key of this table. Primary foreign key, primary foreign key. And the key to this table is what is called a composite key. It's made up of both of these foreign keys that were brought in from the other table. This is done sometimes when this is a terminal entity and there's nothing that comes off of it. It's not a parent to anything. If it is a parent to other child entities, then both these keys get carried along as foreign keys, and you start getting a mess in a complex model, and you need to be aware of that. Look what happens in this case of non-identifying key relationships. Employee ID and team ID are still brought over, just as department and employee were here, but instead of being part of the primary key, they are simply foreign keys. Much better use. So one other concept to be aware of are lists of values. And here, for something like gender, and in many cases, you may have a valid values list, and the valid values list can be handled in multiple ways. It can be handled by associating the valid values at the column level within the database itself. It can be done as a valid value outside that is associated with the attribute, or it can come from a value set that's external to your system altogether. In this case, we associated with gender the values of male and female. While I showed it to you in the physical model, it was really part of the logical model's definition. If I go to the gender and I double click on it, then I see that one of my tabs is valid values. And for valid values, I entered male and female. We'll say I wanted to add a value to that for unknown. Then I'm going to click on Add, and then under Enumeration, I click on Add again, and I'm going to add unknown. So there we go. I'll apply it. I'll click OK. And now gender has those 3 values associated with it. When this gets transformed to physical and becomes a database table, this column will require that the user provide one of those 3 values, or it will give a validation error. So essentially, I think that we've been through everything that we said we were going to cover. We've covered Toad Data Modeler. We went through the different components of it. We talked about entities and associative entities. We went through the different types of attributes and discussed the importance of descriptions. We looked at subtypes. We looked at transforming to physical and what happens to your identifiers when you do that. So I think, class, you've now gone through Data Modeling Part 2, and you have what you need for your Module 2, 1 and first and second assignments. So thank you so much, and have a good day.